As I sit and record this intro, one of this week's guests, Colin, who is back for the second time, is in northern Queensland attending a tribal session with multiple tribes, which he talks about at the start of this podcast. It's very important we understand how the Indigenous people are coming together with multiple tribes and multiple understandings. It's very important because those guys getting along moves us forward and makes me see a place where we could maybe get along. We also welcome a new guest this week, Marcus McBain. I'm doing some work with Marcus behind the scenes that will develop over the next few months. However, Colin's first podcast was very provocative, and there's a few questions we had for him, myself, and Marcus to get answers on, because it's important to discuss these things and clarify perspectives and understandings. And I really enjoy sitting down with Colin. He's very energetic and he's very knowledgeable, and he's definitely on his own path. Some of the things he says matter-of-factly really bump against a lot of the ideas that have come before, and he's very sure of them, and he has the evidence to back them up, and I look forward to working with him a little bit more in the future. I wanted to give a special shout out to Jesse and the fellow coders down in Victoria. Jesse was kind enough to get in touch with me and give me a lead, and I really appreciate that there is a bunch of guys down there who listen to the podcast and appreciate your time. You have inspired me to look again into merch. I don't have the Patreon page back up again. However, that'll come to you all soon. I don't have too much more. I'm going to use the opening song for this one's going to be Demons in My Mind by Rowdy. And I'm going to use that song because I think it's applicable to a lot of us at the moment. It's an interesting time. We're facing new things, and we're in cycles of time and cosmological cycles that won't be repeated for 1,000 years, and we are still in the depths of the prophetic time which began last year, and maybe the ongoing effects of that and the realization of that as it continues to unfold weighs heavy on those of us that are aware. Sometimes it can be hard to see a way forward. However, understand it is always there, and we cannot give in to the demons in our mind. Don't forget that you can start again, and you can refocus, readjust, and re-engage. Thanks, guys. We'll talk soon. Cheers.
Have I burned out? Have I blackened the ground? Will I fight back, find my strength again? Days have been gold, tomorrow losing their shine. Will I give up? I doubt it. I never turn to the bottle to wash away the demons in my mind. I stood up and knocked them down. Though I had a struggle till I seen the colored eyes of the kind. Now they have built me up. I've always had the answer. I'm not one to self-destruct. There's too many smiles that I love. And when my world comes crashing down, I get right back up. I take the brunt, I walk out of the road. Have I burned out? Have I blackened the ground? Will I fight back, find my strength again? Days have been gold, but tomorrow losing their shine. Will I give up? I doubt it. I never turn to the bottom to wash away the demons in my mind. I stood up and knocked them down. And if you wanna take me out, you Have I blackened the ground? Will I fight back, find my strength again? Days have been gold, tomorrow losing their shine. Will I give up? I doubt it. Will I give up? I doubt it. Will I give it all away? No way.
G'day everyone, welcome back. It's my great pleasure tonight to welcome Colin back to the podcast. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you. Greetings, blessings to all our listeners.
Absolutely. And we welcome a good friend of mine and someone I'm doing some work with, Marcus McBain. How are you, mate?
I'm very good.
Thanks for joining us, man. Yeah, you're coming from WA, aren't you?
Yep, the other side of Australia.
Yeah.
Hopefully I'll be over there in the next couple of weeks.
Yes, you're coming over. You're coming over. We're going to do some stuff. We'll talk about that a bit later. But I wanted to get you boys together to just have a bit of a roundtable discussion. As I said, Colin, your podcast, mate, has been very provocative. A lot of people love it. There's some very, very interesting things you said in that podcast about Gosford and Bambara, and there's some very things, and I wanted to come back and have a bit of a conversation about that. I know Marcus has got onto your work as well, the podcast and some of your videos that you've done, and we just want to have a discussion, mate. I suppose before we get started, I did want you to share, because you're off on a bit of a trip, mate. You're off on an important meeting in the next week or so.
Very, very much so, yeah. I'm leaving to head to far north, and so I'm arriving in Townsville to head out to sea to Palm Island, where a very important gathering is taking place. And what's happening there is Palm Island can be remembered as the last mission place set up, where the local indigenous, well, not just local indigenous, but indigenous from all over were sent to Palm Island as an Aboriginal reserve, caged in, as it were, you know. And so the population making up the tens of thousands that are there today on Palm Island, it's quite a big population, but they're made up of over 100 different tribes. And so they come from places like the Gomeroi in Sydney's west, and even the Urugal from out Brisbane's west. You know, they come from all over Australia, and they were dumped together there, all in that one place, all speaking different languages, all carrying completely different ideas of culture. And so you can imagine the chaos that would have caused back then in the day, you know. So here we are 100 years later, and those tribes have, over that time, managed now to unite as one. Now, so what that means is a great deal of their business was done on the mainland by a corporation who managed their budgets, plans, and so on, you know, for the society and even building and so on, funding, etc., these sorts of things. So now with the uniting of all the tribes coming together as one, what that leads to now is that they'll be managing their own business, and that's a big thing. You know, you
that's
can imagine
important.
somebody. It is, yeah. You can imagine
that's very important.
Organising all your business.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very important, mate. And I think that's something you mentioned. Something there that's not very well known. It's something we have spoken about a little bit. Is that they split the tribes up. They took the ones from the desert and put them by the ocean. They took the ones from the ocean and put them in the desert. And they dumped these tribes together in places. And these are tribes that may have never seen each other. They say different language, different ideas of culture, different understandings.
Yeah.
And look, the fact that over the course of time, and it's not that long amount of time if you think about it either, that they've managed to find a place to get along and to move forward as one people. That's really impressive, mate. So you're going up there to do some speaking and to share some knowledge?
Well, I am. Greatly, it's a uniting, and of course, myself, I'm a foundation member of the Mirrabooka, which is a panel placed together by the elders of the Sovereign United Nations of Australia. And so the Mirrabooka, once again, is a panel of seniors like myself, and each has a skill, and so it becomes our responsibility serving the wants of those elders for particular tasks that we need to do within country. So another like myself upon the Mirrabooka would be a teacher of law, L-O-R-E, another of law, L-O-W.
Yes.
And another perhaps of agriculture and medicines and so on. And of course, my responsibility is a big one. My responsibility takes in walking on many lands, not just one land, but walking on many lands. And my objective is to use the skills that I have to reconnect much of the near lost part on stories and knowledge. I say near lost, those things are interrupted, they were totally lost. Just seek those out in country through sharing around sacred fires up and down the East Coast, but also, of course, my special skill. And my special skill is I'm a specialist in paleographics. So paleographics is the reading of the world's most ancient texts and symbols, to which I mastered a good number of different written languages, but taught by my elders in the elders, seniors, traditional artists around Australia, taught by those for the purpose to be able to read pictogram. So writing has a number of variants to it in the way that pictogram is talking out from paints on walls, we could say that, Yep. And then, of course, comes things like ideogram, where a symbol might mean an entire word, or phrase.
One question I had there, mate. One question I had there with your, as you say, you're walking across many lands as far as Indigenous tribes and stuff like that. Is there differences in the artwork? Is there differences in the painting? Is there differences in the symbology? Or is there stuff that echoes through all the ones you've seen?
A lot echoes through. Yes, a lot does. You could say style, for example. But when we look at things like carvings, on the Central Coast, they were far advanced than any of the mobs anywhere around the country. Some of the stuff they did would equal pretty close to what a Greek artist might have done in his day.
Why do you think that is, mate? Why do you think that is, the stuff on the Central Coast? Because, I mean, obviously, I know Marcus wants to talk to you about Carry On. However, you are right. I mean, what I've been looking into since we last spoke is the number of different carvings, not just, obviously, there's the Egyptian hieroglyphs of Carry On, but there's a lot of stuff up and down the East Coast that seems to be revealing itself. A lot of it I've seen through your work. Why do you think that is? Did they have a skill set that they learned? Were they taught? Why is it so different?
Well, they're around that district, the district of Bambara, which takes in, Broken Bay, all those shores around Broken Bay. So that's south of Newcastle to say north of North Sydney, the suburbs of North Sydney. But that area there, the Bambara, was a land that was kept open, and it was kept open for teaching as well as it was initiation. Many initiations were done there. And we know very well, of course, that the Tamil Indian visited there regularly. And so I think the difference there when it comes to their advanced carving might have been an influence from those foreign peoples.
Yeah, the Egyptians included in that, mate, as well, do you think?
Well, the Egyptians didn't exist yet then. Egypt has been there for a long time. Signs of society in Egypt go back 40,000 years. But the Egypt that we know today, of course, that didn't eventuate until the year 3142 BC. That's another story. So this influence that affected the East Coast before that period was not the Egyptians. It was no doubt definitely the Indians.
Yeah.
And of course, when we see their carvings there, they were masters of it,
Oh, the Indian stuff. The Indian
yeah.
stuff's next level. The stone chains and the temples carved out of a single block of stone, and
yeah.
you can't even fathom it. India doesn't get its due either. I don't think. India is shown enough.
Not at all.
To be part of that megalithic culture, mate.
That's right. Just like in Australia, the way it went down, and this is how colonisation works, is those things were left out, suppressed. As schoolboys, we weren't to know how grand they were, And
but you do think the Egyptians came here for over a period of time during their kingdom?
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. Of course, it all began in that year, 3142 BC. That was the important year. That was the big climax. And of course, just to rehash some of the things I've spoken of before, what happened was, again, it was India. They started it in a way that they tell it that they seen in their night view that the North Polar Star was shifting from its axis, the spinning axis of Earth, which they used to navigate. They didn't use compasses then. It was all done by current.
We also didn't have lights either, mate. They used the stars because they were bloody bright. You know what I mean? That's how they used to get around.
That's right, yeah. So when it was seen that the North Polar Star, Tutmur would have been called then, Tutmur, I think. Google check that. But when it was seen to be moving off its north spinning axis, to them that was a great tragedy, in the way that it was pretty obvious what would happen. Any navigation now back to their land in the south, and which they honoured greatly, they called Kumari. Ku meaning south, Mari, the name of the great mother, which is nature, that we call her here too, Mari, same name.
Mm-hmm.
So they were going to be cut off, So they sought a solution. So they seen this time as the cycle of chaos now would descend on earth. And the veil would fall over the eyes of man as he'd be cut off from original teaching.
Mm-hmm.
So what they did was they came here back to the East Coast again. So on this occasion, they did something remarkable. They took from there one named Chief Manay, who comes to us through the Garingi passed down stories. So
we talked about Manay last time, didn't we? We talked about Manay last time. They came and picked him up and took him back. Yeah.
Yeah, he's the key. You'd be amazed at this man, how far he goes. But his early beginnings, he first starts off the story as mentioned once again in the passed down stories of the Garingai. So there he's told of as the great chief and Magi. Now, not all chiefs were Magis. That was something unique.
Yeah.
And but in his time, what he was famous for was many things, but one of the things he was famous for was in his place there in the Bambara, where the Egyptian texts are today. So in that very place there, using his Magi, he created a second dimension. So he made a place there, bringing heaven to earth. And what he did was he copied the night view in the sky, and in circles he carved that all around the sacred Bambara forest.
Yes.
And that's what we see on the floor there today, if anybody's ever investigating,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so he brought.
Hey, Colin, just a sec, Colin. With those round circles that are carved into the rock around there, is that something they would have done up and down the East Coast, do you think? Because I've got a site just outside here in Queensland that's got a lot of those carvings that sit. There's where the imprint is that I've found. And there's a lot of these carvings that sit in that rock face that don't make a lot of sense. One of the things I do want to do is actually go there at night and see if we can get a reflection. Do you think that would be something they did?
Well, it could be worthwhile to pursue that as an idea, keep in mind that Earth's tilt changes the night sky view.
Yeah, true.
And so the night sky view in the year 3142 BC is different to what we see today.
Yeah, precession of the equinox and stuff like that. Yeah.
Those same stars come over our horizon, and it's still daylight here. We don't see those first initial stars.
True.
So do you think this has been the glyphs have been inscribed there before the shift or after the shift?
after the shift. They came several hundred years later in the year 2566 BC, 4th dynasty, reign of Khufu.
And they would be based off the Southern Cross, wouldn't they? Rather than the pole star, not being able to see it from there.
How do you mean, based off?
The Egyptian designs of temples and places are always lined up to the North Star, the pole star.
Good question. Yeah. The site there at Bambara, the furrow that runs between the walls actually runs along a line called the Northwest Line. And what it is the Northwest Line was a sacred line that pointed to that North Star. And keep in mind, they wouldn't have seen that from here.
They wouldn't have been able to see it,
No, but they still knew the axis of Earth as it spun, you know.
So the opposite side of that should have lined up to the southern.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and what's also interesting is that well, actually, no, it wouldn't, would it? Because it's northwest. So it's
northwest.
Yeah.
So it's sort of going.
It wasn't about that. It was about if you can imagine the sun coming at that line, the sun interacted with it at an exact right angle. That's what it was about.
Summer. Summer solstice.
Exactly, yeah. And summer was very important because that was initiation day. It was the 23rd of December, Christmas, if you like, and at that time a king would be born. So that was a good question, Mark. Yeah, because once again, all those things that we see there, the glyphs, Lion Island, the tomb, because there's a tomb as well. It's not just the glyphs. There's a tomb further up.
Yeah.
And then all those wonderful statues that you may perhaps have seen me bring to light recently that washed up on the coast just south of there.
Yeah, some of that stuff was insane, Colin. Yeah,
insane, isn't it?
Yeah, I implore everyone to go to Colin's page. Go and see Colin's page. The carvings that he's actually shown recently over the last little while blew my mind, mate. I mean, stunning. Yeah.
But so that Northwest Line, what's important about it is that when it was created, it was set to Earth's tilt of that day. Where that comes in useful is this. The Buddhists, for example, were asked, why do they build all their sacred things on a northwest line? And the Buddhists of today answered very honestly, well, we don't really know. The answer has been long since cut off. All we know is by doing this is we're imitating the home of God. Interesting, isn't it? So now watch this. When they build to the northwest line, Earth's today spinning axis versus the sun's coming at it on a right angle, of course, it's a different angle. And so something very interesting happened. A few years ago, I get asked the most strangest advice, by the way. And so I was asked advice on a legal matter in the States. And what it was there was two landholders arguing about a boundary wall. And using the compass, the boundary wall didn't fit, north and south. And yet things were done that way, apparently, in that neighborhood. And the argument had gone on. But so when I was asked to give advice on it, wondering why they came to me, for that, I was fortunate to be able to give them exactly the right advice. What it turned out to be was the boundary wall, when it was built to north and south of that day, in the way of
right,
dating.
Dating, so that you can date the wall. So, you can date the wall through the shift. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So now, knowing that, when we look at places like Peru, it's the same. When we look at all those Buddhist structures, many structures throughout the world, they all sit on a northwest line. But the angle of that line, when we use paleoastronomy to turn the sky view back, it can date when it was that those buildings were put in place by the northwest line that they were on. So that's really interesting. Thanks for bringing that up, Marcus.
Marcus, do you want to
for the pyramid? Then we can see when we can date it basically.
Yeah, so
whether it's done before the shift or after the shift.
Yeah. So how old's Bambara? Goodness me, way back. When Earth was on that angle, it was around pretty close, I think. Anyway, for the minute, don't quote me on this exactly. I'm not claiming it as a fact, but I believe it to be about around 23,000 years ago, which is bringing us back to where we are today.
Well, that's it. I mean, we are at the end. We are at the end of that cycle, aren't we, boys? You know what I mean? The precession of the equinox, we actually come back around. You know, we've done a couple of loops, and we're actually back at the start now. That's the interesting thing about the times that we live in.
Yeah,
this December we watched them all cross.
Yes. Mm. So I'm going to take you back to the start now, where we were. You were asking about Monet and how that fits in. So once again, Monet was very famous here in Australian Aboriginal law for a number of things, but one of the things was he created a heaven here on earth for the ancestors to dwell alongside us. What is above is below. Well, it has an origin too, you know. Mm. And so what happened was when the Indian, and when I say the Tamil, it was certainly the Tamil sailors, but I see too there was an influence from Indus Valley. And I researched there quite heavily into Indus Valley, so I've got a fair insight. So it's
Indus Valley is interesting too, though, mate, isn't it? Indus Valley is interesting because they just disappeared. Like it seems like they got up one day and left their lunch behind. You know what I mean? Like it's like one day they picked up and just left.
They did.
You know?
They went to Egypt, and this is where it goes. So initially, what happened was
they came wiped out there.
What was that?
In the Indus Valley.
Wiped out.
Yeah, because it was the place was kind of level. All of the houses and all of the.
No, you'd be surprised. It's still there. You know, it's no different to what you'd expect for anything that's several thousand years old. But it does.
I did a lot of research also in the Indus Valley.
Yeah. Mm.
Because my grandfather left me a seal.
Did he?
Ooh. Yeah, very very old seal from India.
Ooh.
And
love to see that.
I started researching the seal, and then I found the clay tablets.
Yes.
Which was the first money.
Yeah. Well, they say it was money. Yeah. It's all guess, of course, you know.
And this is the seal that printed that money.
Yeah.
This is the thing for printing it.
I can imagine what it looks like. Yes. Yeah.
A unicorn on it.
Yeah, it's a unicorn, isn't it? Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. You'll probably find that unicorn has got a mixture of animals in it. It wouldn't just be a unicorn. You might find it's got lion's toes. And
but it's got a body like a rhinoceros.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So you remember earlier, I was making mention. You might have missed this, Marcus, but just before you came in, but we were chatting about how it was that the old ones used. They put all the animals, not all of them, but they put a great many animals together in one depiction. And what it would be to have a powerful body, sharp claws, a horn like unicorn, which is a weapon, you know. And what it was nature herself combined. So all the deadly assets of nature combined into one animal. And that's nature when she's protecting her children. So her children, of course, are all the other animals, you know, us included. And so it's called a morphed animal beast. And in Egypt, we see it with a hippopotamus body, a crocodile head, lion's feet, and so on, you know.
Well, yeah, you're talking about the Anubis and talking about all those different.
Well, not quite.
The dog's head and the human body,
but this one, and that's what Marcus has. You know, that's just a little bit of information for you. What that is, Marcus, you wouldn't get that anywhere else. So it's a morphed animal beast.
That unicorn then disappears from history after that.
Well, you'd be surprised.
Until the time of England.
Yeah. Many cultures still display.
The UK adopted that symbol.
Yeah.
As the coat of arms.
The UK adopted whatever symbol they decided.
Yeah, they would have known what it was, you know.
They would have done. They would have done, yeah.
Yeah. So nature's combined, might is what you're looking at there, you know, in that animal.
Do you think, boys, just a thought that came into my mind then, like, do you think, like, we're talking about the Indus Valley and when they moved and all that sort of stuff, do we think the timeline we have is accurate, or do you think that it maybe is out a little bit, or are we saying it's because of the stars we can accurately date it?
Yeah, we can. Because of the stars, we can accurately date it, yeah. What they mentioned as happening is datable through paleoastronomy. And that's the date they come up with. It's exactly bang on, 3142 BC. So, so once again, in that year, what happened was the Indus Valley, the people from there, and the Tamil, who were the great early ancient sailors of the sea, came back to the East Coast, their beginnings place. That's how they honoured the East Coast, the land in the south. But they took with them Chief Monet out into the world. And what it was, his chief custodian of original knowledge there in the beginnings place. So to them, he's the big man. There's nobody bigger
when you
than
say
that.
so, Colin, we last podcast we went through this story again, and I love hearing it again. But since I heard it last time, I've got questions. Right? You talk about the beginnings place. Okay.
Yes.
What do we mean by that? Does that mean that the human race started here? What do we talk? What are we talking about here? Because I've heard that original, you know what I mean? Like there's the evidence to suggest that we walked out of Africa is pretty much blown out of the water now with 5 minutes research, with the bones that they're finding, with the footprints that they're finding, with all these bits and pieces. So when you say beginnings place, I mean, you're talking about major continents, India, Indus Valley, Egypt, these sorts of things. What do we mean by beginnings place?
Okay, so to answer that, I'll explain through telling you the creation story on the East Coast, how it goes. So it went like this. Before the cycle of man, there were trees. Before there was animals, there were trees. And we know this, in scientific fact, that, that as Earth progressed with life, it began with the plants and trees.
Yep.
So there they tell it this way, that upon Lion Island, or Muli Mulla is her traditional name, meaning beautiful mother. Kumari is what the Indians called it, the great mother in the south. But what happened there was this, that upon the top of Lion Island, on its most easterly highest point, there grew a large tree, the tree of life. So her name is Tula Marie. Again, that's Marie, that great mother. So what happened there before the cycle of man was each day as the sun's energy came over the horizon, the first place it touched is the highest branches in the tree. From there, the energy of the sun goes down through her branches, down through her mighty trunk, and down deep through her roots into earth.
Were we saying that this tree still exists, or is it the grandmother tree at Carryong is of that tree?
Well, it's funny you should say that. There is a tree there. And of course, I was sent to see if the tree was still there. But the sight that I beheld as I stood in that spot was a mighty tree, so wide we could all get in there and have a party. And but it was broken off, and it was the very same scene. It was quite eerie actually, as the buildings in New York when they came down, and we were left to see those black shards sticking up. That's exactly the scene that was before my eyes. So the tree was completely hollow, no thicker than the thickness of the palm of my hand. And yet it was as big as a room, broken off at about 5 meters high, but the wood was no longer wood. What had happened there was up high there on the most easterly point, there's no new mineral deposits coming, being laid down as it would happen, say, where I'm standing now here on the mainland. Things would get buried very quickly. Up there was nothing coming, just the salt and the rain and the sun. And in that, this hulk of a tree had virtually turned to, I wouldn't call it stone. I made up a word looking at it. I called it saltified. There's no such word I know of, but that's how it appeared. It was a living fossil standing right there, in front of my eyes.
They
turn
to silicon.
All around me were 4 large boughs, big as cows, as fat as a cow and as tall as a cow and longer than a bus. And these 4 were broken off, and they lay in the bush all around. And they too were hollow like the trunk. So that tree, why I was sent to see that tree from my Gomeroi elders, was to check if she was still there.
And are we talking Lion Island, or are we talking Carry-On? Yeah, we're talking Lion Island.
Lion Island, which is part of Bambara back then. Today it's just that few hundred hectares that's left. But in the old days, it wasn't like that at all. It was that entire district. So once again, what the tree did was the tree birthed newer life into earth. And so Ra, the sun, talking Egyptian now, and Marie, because they too called her Marie, through the energy of the life-giving energy of the sun going through her into the earth, birthed newer life into earth each day. So what happened now, how man came about was this, that from her trunk first ran the red sap, which became the blood upon the river of life that runs through your veins and my veins, and Marcus there, runs through all our veins, but especially no more than it did original man, those here. So what happened was, in that red sap first formed life, animal life, in the way that it started as tiny bugs. Over deep time, and then more deep time, those tiny bugs evolved into tiny little animals like mice and things. And they ran around up and down the tree, and that's where they lived. Eventually, after more evolution and more deep time, those animals climbed down mother's trunk onto the ground. And from there, they spread out over the Western Mountains, which is the Blue Mountains from that area, and out across all the land. And then one day out there evolved into man. So it's very clever. They say out there. They don't say where, And but then one day, Bayami, the sun, woke man up after man had slept a long time, as did his brothers and sisters, the other animals. But Bayami woke man up and put into man his knowledge. And then there was two men that he woke up, one called Darulaman.
Oh, this is the brothers.
One, yes, and the second one carries no name. He's only called as the Son of Light. So one day the Son of Light remembered Mother. And he said to Darulaman, I'm going home. I'm going to fight a mighty battle. And his battle was to bring light over dark using Bayami's knowledge.
Yeah. So, mate. So this is an extension of the story you told us before. I've got a question around the creation stuff, because the other one that you hear a lot in regards to Indigenous culture and Indigenous people is the Palladians and the Orions. Okay, so that's the Palladian, the seven sisters of Pallades, chased by the three brothers of Orion across the stars to here. That's a very short version of the story. Does that fit in anywhere we're talking about? Where we're talking or not?
It does. Comes later. That's Sirius, by the way, that chases these seven Pleiades. It's not actually Orion. It's a different story. So they come into it too. But that's after the cycle of man began. The seven ladies, the Pleiades, when they came, was to bring star law. That's where star law comes from. So the stories we have when we look at the Milky Way unfolding, they were brought by the Pleiades. So it's more than reasonable to suggest that they didn't come before the cycle of man, because there'd be nobody to share that to, So that was a later thing. But what's really interesting is that creation story on the East Coast I just explained to you now. How scientific is that, compared to, like just being born out of dust, And at the same time, it doesn't claim any firsts, which happens in every country, everywhere. We were first, The way they explain it was, that those tiny animals went out over all the land, and one day out there evolved into man.
Or theoretically, aren't we shrews? Isn't that right, boys? Aren't we shrews? That was the first mammal, was a shrew, some little mouse-looking thing.
Yeah.
So that sort of echoes the story you're just talking about there, mate. Marcus, did you have any questions, bud? Did you have anything you want to say to some of the stuff we've been talking about?
No, it's interesting. It's interesting. Similar to quite a lot of the other creation.
Well, and that's what I find too. That's what I find too, isn't it? The creation story, whether it be the Palladian story or some of these other creation stories, they do echo. And I think it's the insulation of certain countries throughout the decade, throughout the millennia, that they think it's their creation story. But what if it's not what if it's our creation story? You know what I mean? What if it actually goes across all culture?
It is.
Yeah. Well, we can only take it back to what's the oldest text or carvings explaining it. And of course, the oldest we can find is Australia. Now that
How
story.
old are they now, though? How old are those carvings now, mate? What's the oldest carvings we got now?
What, in Australia?
Yeah.
Certainly West Australia, there, and it's important to only date them by science, of course. So they're dated by science. They go back about 48,000 years.
Yeah.
Here on the East Coast, our climate is isn't as stable as it is in West Australia.
No.
Where we have seasons and so on. Where at that particular part where those were done, it's very stable. So in a stable environment, science was able to measure deposits left by tiny little creatures that live on the rock. And where we couldn't do that here because winter kills them off, and then summer bakes them off, and so on. So it's too scattered. But what we can date here are paints. And when I say that, you can't date all paints. Many paints were just made from mineral, ochre, and so on. But in many other paints too, they used animal fat. And what it was known to them that it extended the life of the paint. But what it does is, animal fat is a carbon, of course, so it can be carbon dated. So the ones on the East Coast, the oldest that we've been able to date, only because they have carbon in their paints, are around 28,500 years old.
Really?
And that's pretty old, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And when we compare anything to Egypt or Greece, here we're talking 28,000 plus years. But as I say, over 48,000 there in West Australia. And so those ones in West Australia are talking numeric ideogram. So they're talking dots and dashes. And of course, we know today numeric ideogram is an advanced writing language. It makes Shakespeare look like he's just starting out. It was so advanced, and they were using that 48,000 years ago. That's remarkable.
But that's the dashes and the dots. They're numbers and letters and symbols at the same time, aren't they? Like it's a multi-leveled language.
Well, if I just count to 4 for you, for example, number 1 is Mal, M-A-A-L, as we might say in English. So its means are a new, first, beginning, creator. So you can see where that's going. It's all like, first, Bulla. So Bulla, number 2, is breath, air, wind. So, for example, if you just walked in the room and lightened the room up, that's Bulla. You just brought new breath into the room. Yuli Angala, number 3, entering the dark. So if you were, say, heading to the north, you might just say that, where are you going? Yuli Angala, to the north. The north is where the cyclones and things come from, so they call that the dark.
I was going to say, I lived up north. I was in Arnhem Land for many years, and that Yuliangala, that just it caused a memory in my mind. That's they do describe that, the Yuliangala. That's anyway. I don't know where it's come from, but I just been hanging a minute. I've heard that before because I spent many years up in Arnhem Land in the late 90s, early 2000s.
So Wimalunda would be number 4. And Wimalunda means a great fire from afar. So that could be the sunrise. But at the same time, you could say it too, talking of the sunset, a great fire in afar, So if I said to you, Malbulla, Wimalunda, I just said to you then, the Creator breathes life from a great fire from afar. So this is numeric ideogram, this writing language. And
so do those numeric ideograms, mate, do they echo across to the East Coast as well?
They all used it, yeah. It was a language where everybody had different spoken languages, but they used the one writing language, and everybody knew what they were talking about. And it often makes me wonder about Babylon, and the Tower of Babylon.
The Tower of Babel, yeah. The one language. Yeah, that's what makes me.
Yeah.
And these numeric ideograms as well, mate. So I know you don't just sort of restrict yourself to Australia. Have you seen echoes of this writing in similar format in other cultures, in other countries?
Every country all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So would you believe it was still used in England right up to the days of Guy Fawkes? So Guy Fawkes was the guy that tried to blow up Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we have bonfire night. And he's the guy you stick on the top, Guy Fawkes.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened was English Parliament, were always, working outside of the Crown. There was the Royalists, and then there was the Parliamentarians, And of course, the Royal didn't like the Parliament at all. It was only brought together through the sake of it was Macbeth, wasn't it? And so on. So what it was they hid their accounts from the Crown, so they couldn't see them. So to do that, they used what they called tally sticks, and they talked Murray Guelder or ideogram on it. So when Guy Fawkes tried to blow the place up, that's where he set his gunpowder, was in amongst all the thousands of tally sticks there underneath Parliament House. And so he was sure to get a great fire out of it. And so after his failed attempt, that's when they got rid of all the tally sticks from under Parliament House, and then it was disused. So when was that? When was Guy Fawkes?
I was trying to remember when Guy Fawkes was. Yeah.
So the tally sticks.
Tally
sticks were like the servers.
Which ones?
The tally sticks. They were like the servers under the World Trade Center.
Yeah, very much so, I guess. Yeah.
And I've heard of those tally sticks before. I mean, that's interesting. When was Guy Fawkes? We don't do that anymore, eh? Like, I mean, when I was a kid in the 80s and early 90s, I remember going down to the Oval, and they had everyone for 6 months would go and chuck all their old chairs and beds and whatever else and make this massive fire. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, stick him on the top.
Stick that doll on the top. Yeah.
That was it. Guy Fawkes. Yeah. Yeah, so ideogram, it was used right throughout. They all used it. There's very few countries I haven't seen evidence of numeric ideogram. There, certainly in Egypt. So in Egyptian hieroglyphs, they carried it on into hieroglyphs, when the time came that they were now writing in hieroglyph. And when I was learning, and we'd see these dashes alongside otherwise animalistic looking forms and so on, and these dots and dashes, they were said to change a word from, say, like the word cat into the word cats, so making it into a plural.
Yes, I've seen that.
Course, yeah, but those of course weren't aware that there was even an ideogram. So it seems it's one of those things that's been missed in Translate, and like, who would have guessed, So when I used to read a stela, and it might take me, say, 20 minutes or something to read a stela that's as tall as you and I, you'd see the numeric ideogram in there alongside. So now I believe that's what they were doing. Now when I read that same stela, it takes me 3 times as long. Because by the time you add in the
dots and dashes and the ideograms,
you've got an entire whole new story, And we see numeric ideogram all over the place, And
that's the thing about the carry-on glyphs. I've heard.
Thanks for calling it carry on.
Yes, that because I've heard quite a few different interpretations.
Yeah, I can explain those for you anytime you want to hear
of what it means. But still, I haven't got something which is, I feel it's backed up and solid.
Yeah.
But it was interesting, your comparison to the
Westcar Papyrus. Yeah, and that was the key,
You go, Marcus.
I've showed you a video to 2 people, and one really didn't like it. And one really liked it.
Yeah, good.
And
you get that.
So Dr. Geezer, who I'm working with, he said correct, but he thinks that the sign of Cheops there, is a marker of time, that it gives the current king in position during that time.
Right. Yeah.
So it starts off with who, and it gives the position in time starting.
Yeah. Yeah,
as you would.
Yeah,
story.
Yeah, it actually mentions her name.
Time.
Yeah, mentions her name 14 times on the walls.
Why do you say her?
Yeah, that's the next question. Was a girl.
Okay, well,
that's. Do you know that? I tell you what. I tell you what, Colin. Out of all the things that you said on the podcast, Khufu being a girl was probably the one that everyone went, hang on a minute, what? That was the one thing, mate. So can you walk us through why
Certainly.
you think Khufu is a girl and the reasoning behind that it's represented there at Carry On? Because I know Marcus wanted to ask that as well. Marcus, mate, make sure you talk into your mic. You're very softly spoken. That was all.
Oh, yeah.
Because you kept moving your head away from your microphone and you kept moving. So just, just make sure we talk into the mic. But Khufu being a girl, Colin, tell us a story, mate.
Well, like all else, I had to face that for a first time as well, And so what it was it says on the wall she's a girl, straight up, As soon as it mentions Khufu, the word girl appears directly before her name every single time, So when I made that video, the West Car Papyrus, I didn't mention that, you'll notice. I talk as if it's a man. And why I was doing that, again, that was that strategy in lessening the size of the arena to have to defend from. It was too early to have to defend that then.
No, you said she a few times.
That might have been in the next one, which was...
it slipped.
Well, perhaps in the next one. There was two I launched, and one was an actual translation of the walls themselves. And the initial one, in the 11th month, 2014, I was really careful not to mention it, But so what it was anyway was it mentioned that straight away, girl, So I had to wrestle with that. So when I started to research why it was we thought it was a man at all, it comes to us through Petrie. So Ernest Petrie was an early Egyptologist that worked in Giza around the time of the turn of the 20th century, so 1900 and so on. So it was he that termed Khufu as a man. That was where it began. And what it was, the only evidence there is for that coming from Petrie or anywhere else was that he found a 6-inch statue. And what it was he found half of a statue. And on a dig. And so he wanted to find the other half. So he put out a reward for anybody that could find the other half of this small 6-inch statue. And some weeks later, a fellow found the other half and presented it to Petrie. Petrie, in his own chambers, placed it together and renovated it, and put it into whole, and then introduced it to the world, as being Khufu. But the thing is, he attested that. But the thing was, that's the only evidence, this 6-inch statue. But when I looked at the 6-inch statue, it doesn't say Khufu at all. It has the name Medju written on the side. And Medju was one of Khufu's names. Her names were Khufu Meritites Hanetsun Medju. But Medju was her spiritual name, in the way that when I was confirmed as a Catholic as a kid, I didn't have any say in it, but I was given the confirmation name of Andrew, that was a saint. So they, like us, had those names. I'm Colin James Andrew Hayter. She was Khufu Meritites Hanetsun Medju. So that they too had names like we did that carried different things. So her Medju name, a lot of people carried that name. It was quite common, And so that statue that P2 found has the name. Well, it's not even complete, by the way. It's broken. You can hardly make it out, but it's thought to, and I think it says what that too, Medju, but it's not actually clear. So what happened is Petrie broke all the rules of attesting anything, and there are rules. Firstly, something's got to be found in an area that can be linked to that reign. So if you found something of Khufu in Giza, well, you're on to a good start, because Khufu is known to have been in Giza. But this place where that thing was found, 4th dynasty didn't even exist in that area at all, and had nothing in common with them. And the thing was, it was found in the street. So that's another thing. It's not found within a build that is unique to that reign or that person. And the other thing is, it was put together by Petrie in his own chambers, not by the Department of Antiquities of the day. So it was done out of sight of anybody else. And So in all those things I just mentioned, it broke every rule there is for attesting anything to anything, you know. But important.
Isn't Khufu Cheops?
Cheops. Yeah, it's just another way of saying it. Yeah, if you were Greek, you would say Cheops, and we might say Khufu. Yeah.
So you
Same
feel
name.
that Cheops is a woman?
Yes, that's right. Yep. Khufu, Meritites, and Netson, Medju. So when we looked away from Petrie, no, Meritites. Meritites, yeah. Khufu, Meritites, and Netson, Medju. So
that sounds like a girl's name.
Yeah,
it does. Yeah, it does. Yeah,
and, yeah. So you notice on a cartouche, and
boys will be boys, eh?
Yeah, on a cartouche of a royal ruler, you see the re, like the re symbol, like they've got the sun up the top. And what was different about Khufu's is it isn't a re; it's got hashes running through it, 3 hashes. So where this came to light greatly was, remember that debate about the inscriptions found within the Great Pyramid, and they were trying to say that Weiss, Colonel Weiss, who opened the pyramid, had forged them himself. It was Stitchkin. What's his name? I forget Stitchkin's full name now. How can I forget that? But he brought up the idea. No, hang on, that's not how you spell Khufu. It would be a re. It's a sun. All rulers had a re on the top. But she didn't. Hers is different to all the else's. Instead of just being a round circle, it's a round circle with 3 hashes, which is the word, or the pronunciation, kha, which is a Khufu in kha, And so that too is a feminine symbol. That's the name of the moon, kha. And that symbol used the same way is the symbol for the moon, So her name is made up out of entirely feminine, So anyway, when we realised that the evidence of Petrie was not just false, it was feeble, so feeble it was laughable, When I started to look next into all other tellings there in Egypt, not just there at Bambara, but in Egypt, every single telling has before it girl, says Khufu girl every single time. And so they weren't holding it a secret, The only reason we didn't know about it was that false attesting by Petrie. And by the way, at the time, Petrie caught flack over that, Every Egyptologist was happy to see false attesting going on. And there was a heck of a controversy about it.
Is that the statue as well, Colin? You can see that statue today, can't you? And it doesn't actually look like the 2 pieces go together. Like it looks like they've been manipulated to be put together. It's almost 2 bits of stone. Like it doesn't look like it should go together at all.
Well, I don't know how good a job he did of it, but just the fact that he did it at all in private, that's just breaking all the rules. Terribly wrong. Yeah, and it robbed Egypt of a great part of its history. And so Egypt today, the sovereigns of Egypt, the people in the street, they look at Khufu and call Khufu their missing queen. It's only us English speakers and all those influenced by us ever since, that think she's a bloke at all. And so when I'm explaining this in Egypt, they're looking at me like, that's old news. It wasn't new to them at all,
Isn't that interesting, though? Because that's some of the stuff that I have found. It's like the disconnect between... like we discuss things down here in Australia, like talking to Muhammad and some of those other guys over there as well about some of these stories. Yeah. It's like, oh, yeah, we've known that for ages. But it's like it hasn't actually reached us down here. I think that the expansion of this knowledge needs to happen,
It does, yeah. So for Khufu and the girl business, it would be impossible for me to be able to prove she wasn't a girl. There's that much on it. There's really that much. It's hundreds and hundreds of cartouches and tellings of Khufu, and they all say she was a girl, including those here at Bambara, And but I wonder if your good friend Dr. Geezer there noticed that in the cartouche, that it's not a re on top of her name as it is with everybody else, It's
you notice there's a lot of discrepancies to the narrative. He says that the body of Tutankhamun is not that's not Tutankhamun either.
Right.
That's someone else they buried there.
Well, whoever he was certainly a royal. There's no doubt about that. His blood checks out. His blood type description, when seen at molecular level, is A2MN. What MN is MN relates to enzymes on your immune system, which attach to your blood cells, and they're passed down mother to mother to mother, like through the womb. No, that's another thing. Yeah. Blood type descriptions are your blood, and looked at once again at molecular level for your enzymes, and so the blood type description, that science of blood type descriptions, not to be confused with blood types. That's just categories. So blood type descriptions. What's important about them are that they carry a very rare title in science. Blood type descriptions, that science is called irrefutable. Now, very few things in science are irrefutable. All science is
true.
Yeah, all science is called as a theory. It's just how we best understand a thing until more newer learning comes on board. Mm-hmm. However, a very small margin of things fall into the line of irrefutable, where they are beyond the chance for argument against. And blood type descriptions are one of them. Yeah. So Manchester University Hospital in 1956 did the blood autopsies on all those found in the Valley of the Kings. So this is King Tut and family, along with all the generals and leading public servants found there along with them. And what was found was all of the ruling family, no exceptions, are all A2MN blood type description. All the others, leading generals and public servants and so on, were all the usual blood type description you would get in any multicultural society. The A2MN is unique to only the ruling family. So what's remarkable about that is, get this now, that's an extreme rare blood type description, extremely rare. The list of who carries that blood is very tiny, and it goes like this. There was, at the time then, something like 13 random people in the Netherlands shared that. And the next one was, there's a small tribe on the west coast of Africa, about mid-Africa, a tribe of around 3,000 who also carry that. That's unique to them. And then one other is the Blackfeet American Indian tribe. They're all A2MN. The greatest number of A2MN is basically the entire population of the north of Australia, where I'm going next week. That's another reason I'm going there. They're all A2MN. So when Manchester University Hospital came up with that, they said the MN, we can't tell what disease it's meant to fight. It's beyond us at this time, but it's hoped in the future one day we'll work it out. Well, science did eventually catch up, and only just recently. And it really took keeping my finger on the pulse for years, waiting for the answers to come up. And you're making a cuppa. I'm jealous if you're making a cuppa. You are, right?
No.
And so what came up was this. It was found what it was. So it turns out to be an attachment to our immunes that fight an extreme. So there's a lot of rarities in this, but an extreme rare malaria. And actually, so now we have a cause for it, And but then when medical science come up with that, they said, but we've no idea where that malaria actually has its origins. So here's part of the answer, but not the total answer. So again, keeping my finger on the pulse, what I was able to do was I was able to search the world's records for mosquito control. So mosquito control is a very serious business. It has to be. 300 million people a year die of malaria.
Oh, more people have died of malaria than anything else ever. Yeah.
300 million a year, yeah. And millions more, are permanently maimed.
Why are they testing people?
Equally as bad.
Weren't they being quarantined? Wasn't there mosquito?
So malaria control.
Calm down.
Yeah, seriously though, malaria control is as acute as we see with COVID. It is, and well established. So all countries in the South Hemisphere, carry large budgets for that purpose, for the control of mosquitoes. So anyway, no better than Australia though. They do a really good job of it, and they're excellent record keepers. And so watching their mosquito control, well, bugger me dead, it came up, didn't it? That's that exact disease, and the mosquito type that carries it. And it turned out that that mosquito only exists in one place, a tiny island just off the shore of Townsville amongst the Palm Island group.
Really?
So again, you can see by going there this week, it's getting pretty exciting, isn't it?
Take your Aerogard.
Yeah. Tell me about it. And so what we have is this. Once again,
you don't want to get bitten by one of those, mate.
No, that's right. I'll tell me about it. Yeah.
Hey, boys, preaching to the choir. I nearly died from a mosquito bite in 2013. It's not fun stuff. Yeah. Don't play around with that stuff.
Yeah, you got me worried now. Because this particular one is also the world's most deadly. Would you believe that?
Yeah.
So it's the rarest malaria, the most deadly malaria carried by a mozzie that only dwells in this one place, a tiny island on Earth,
Mate,
So
you're going there.
Yeah. So what we
You better take the helmet,
mate, mate, an explorer's game is a hard game, I can tell you. People think I'm on holiday, but this is the sort of stuff I got to do. So what we have when it all comes down to it is the rulers of Egypt. This is the way Manchester University said it back in the day. They
had
said,
been bitten by those mosquitoes.
Yeah. Now they said we can't explain this now. Their learning is beyond us at this stage. But what is irrefutable is the rulers of Egypt, those 17 people in the Netherlands, that tribe there in Africa, and the Blackfeet American Indians, and the great population of Northern Australia, all once shared ancestors that lived in the same street. Or beside the same street was the word they used. Yeah.
Who were bitten by those mosquitoes.
Yeah. So in now finding the origins to what MN is for, and finding the location, what that tells us is those rulers, basically that's their mother's land. Passed down womb to womb,
Yeah, they must have been there a long time, long enough to get an antibody.
Yeah, and we know
it's a very strange thing.
Yeah, and we know that the Aboriginal race is the longest.
But what blood type is that actually?
Society on Earth.
I've never heard of A2 blood type.
A2MN, yeah. So so when you look at blood groups, you've got A's and B's and so on. So they're categories. But then there's categories after them where you've got A plus and so on. Yeah, so it breaks up like that. And then further down the line, when you go deep into it now, at molecular level, then you have their descriptions of what's attached to that blood alongside, such as MN, and blood type descriptions. So blood type descriptions is an old science.
Like RH. RH has got the antibody also.
Yeah.
RH negative. It's got the antibody for something.
For what? Yeah, for
kills
something.
Anything. Yeah. The mother, it can only be passed mother to mother.
Right. Yeah. Because that's where the immunities are made, of course, in the womb.
Yeah. If the mother has a child who isn't RH negative, it will be aborted. The blood will, the antibodies will attack the child.
Yeah, right.
But yeah. Well, MN's a bit more forgiving than that.
So boys, let me break this down for a second, because you just gave a very succinct explanation to something that's actually quite massive. Okay, what we're saying is the Blackfoot Indians, tribe in Northern Africa, the Egyptian kings, and a percentage of the kings and pharaohs that ruled Egypt, and
all of them, no exceptions.
Yeah, no exceptions. Northern Australia, or indigenous from Northern Australia.
Yep.
We're all bitten by the same mosquito, or developed the same antibodies and the same blood type at some point in the past. I mean, we're talking about genealogical DNA evidence that the three major continents, or one, the biggest island in the world, and two major continents are irrefutably connected. I mean, we can't sort of just brush past that. You know what I mean? Like, that's massive.
Yeah, that's massive. Yeah, it's massive. Yeah, but more important is that it takes us home to that mother's land. You know, so in my going there, what's important about it, you know, it's not just I'm going there because there's a uniting going on. That's the first reason. But it was on my horizon anyway. You know, because of now finding the locality of that origin of the MN.
I tell you what you need to get, Cole. What you need to get, mate, is what I used to use for malaria. There's this sunscreen you can get, and you almost got to put it on with a trowel. But it's got like DDT in it as well. Like, it's nasty stuff, but you're never going to get bitten by one of those mosquitoes, mate. Yeah, that's the good stuff.
Well, the Australian
DDT,
but the Australian effort for knocking off the mosquito, they reckon they've knocked it off. So fortunately, I should be free from it, you know. But when I say they knocked it off, they last sprayed. It was only about a year ago. There was another report. There was 2 blokes had rowed down or sailed down from Papua New Guinea, and they caught it, you know. And and that's how it was. I came up with the information. It was a later spray, you know, only just been done.
Yeah, right.
And, but hopefully they've knocked it on the head, you know.
So what are we saying here, boys? What are we saying? We'll leave the mosquitoes behind. What are we saying? What are we saying here? Are we saying that? I mean, obviously, one of the things that we're saying here at Unlocking the Code is that there was once a global culture, a global understanding, a global spiritual culture that probably got along a bit better than we do now. Maybe, maybe not. But if we're saying that your blood types and your DNAs, they are matching, does that mean we're communicating, we were seafaring? Like, how far do we want to take that? Like, that's a question. You know?
Well, okay, I'll have to take you back to where we were talking before, but I didn't get to finish telling you about where Monet went out, you know?
Yeah,
so,
well, he went, I know from the last podcast, they took him and he basically travelled to South America, India, Egypt, all the major places, sharing knowledge, yeah?
So for Marcus, it went like this, you know, was those Indians, you know, they seen it that the time of chaos was on. They called it the Kali Yuga, and the world would now be cut off from original teaching because they won't be able to navigate back. So what they did was they took Monet and they together went out into all those lands to teach agriculture, math, writing, agriculture, you know, I said that, didn't I? Building, but importantly, law, Lore. And that's why Monet was there. He's gone out to teach law. And no doubt it would have been an Indian or Indus Valley teaching building, you know, like you wouldn't see an Aboriginal chief teaching that, you know. So like us from the Mirrabooka, we each have our
skill
focus,
sets.
what it is that we teach. Yeah, same for them, you know. But the other part to their goal was they were going out to teach knowledge into man, to give them the knowledge they needed to survive the cycle of chaos, Kali Yuga. But then also they were going to the north to build a home there for Mother in the north, because nobody would be able to find her again in the south. So they were going there to build a copy of the home of Mother here in the south, there in the north. That's that northwest line we were talking about that Bambara sits on. So they went to Giza. That's where they built it. So Giza is built on one side on a northwest line. What we see is right in front of the Khufu pyramid is a small pyramid. There's 3. They call them the Queen's Pyramids. But importantly, the last one in the row is called the Pyramid of Henetsen. Now, you remember Khufu's name? Khufu Meritites Henetsen Meju. It's her, you know. So it starts off that you've got the tiny Pyramid of Henetsen, and then the next thing coming down the line, right in front of the Great Pyramid, is the Isis Temple, which is basically flattened today. I've been there, but there's not much left, but it's still there, you know. And then further down their line comes the Sphinx. And then further down the line comes up the Wall of the Crows, which is an interesting place. That's a cemetery that holds the builders who built the pyramids. So the bricklayers and concreters and all that, they're all buried there. and you dig that and just opened last year. Well, not last year. I lost a year with COVID. Opened up a couple of years ago. I was actually one of the first Egyptologists in there with a team from Norway. So anyway, so when we look at Bambara now, we have the tomb just up from the glyphs, and on the tomb wall, it tells what it is. It says, this is the eternal resting place. Behind this wall is the tomb or the house for Henetzen. They call it Henetzen too. And then as you walk away from that, you walk between the walls of Bambara, which is the temple of Isis, leg of the bull. That's what it's called there, the glyphs. It's not just glyphs on a rock. That is the temple of Isis, leg of the bull. So once again, in Giza, they have the house for Henetzen, the little pyramid, and then the next thing is the Isis temple. Here in Australia, we've got the tomb, which you can go and see the text on the wall. And then the next thing comes up is between the walls, the Isis temple here, and then continue down that northwest line, and then you've got Lion Island. In Egypt, continue down the line and you hit the Sphinx in exactly the same proportions. They copied it exactly in a way that they called it measure. They divided everything by 7, you know, and so there they were. Once again, they went out to teach knowledge into man around the world to give them the knowledge to survive the timeline of chaos. And then they were going to the north to build a home for mother. So what you're asking me about was around the world, what were they all doing, communicating, what was going on? That's your answer. That's what was going on, was when they went out to teach into those lands. So Monet, when he left here, we see him in India as Manu. So he's one of the avatars on the boat that went out during the Kali Yuga, the great chaos in the water, thought to be a flood where Noah came from, and all those things since. So we see him as Manu. In Crete, we see him there, and he's Minos.
Do we have evidence of a flood going back 5,000 years, 6,000 years? Is there any geological evidence?
There's zero, none. It didn't happen. There's no geological evidence in the history of Earth that suggests that there was a flood in the cycle of man. Didn't happen, never. What did happen was in India, when they wrote of what I'm telling you now, and they talked about the land of the south would be cut off, and they talked of Lion Island, they said the waters were drawn around. They didn't say sunk. And it was from that India tells it that the great land sunk. And from there it just went on, and now everybody, into popular belief,
So that's a discussion I had with someone the other day when we're talking about how language changes, from these picto-ideograms to Hebrew, to Latin, to Greek, to French, to English, to modern English. The original meaning of what these things actually meant is completely different. And like sometimes I've seen some of the translations where it's like it's a completely different sentence in comparison to what it actually meant. So you don't think you think that's a misconstrued piece of evidence. It's not necessarily a great flood. It's just been.
It was. Yep, they just went into popular belief coming from that. The waters were drawn around. They're very clear. Those ancient Indian texts. And but even today, like you could strike a Buddhist monk and he'll tell you about the flood. That's how deep it went. They all made the same mistake. One person said flood, and they all thought flood ever since. And
so, just out of curiosity, Colin, because like I truly appreciate your conviction and all that sort of stuff. Thanks. But what makes your interpretation correct and everyone else's incorrect? You know what I mean? Like that's a fair question.
We can prove it. That would be it. Yeah, where all else can't. The Bibles, for example, all of them, and there's a good many, from the Quran, the beautiful Quran, I like to call it, to the Torah for the Jew, the marvelous Torah, and of course, the Holy Bible for those of Christian folk. But what they all share together is none of those things in them can ever be placed towards any fact whatsoever.
Yes, it's complete. Yeah, it's all complete fiction. Yeah.
Well, but the thing is, it's not. It's not fiction. It's just nobody's been able to put them to fact. So far, and so far doesn't exist around here. So what we see today in the Bibles is the world's in for a big shock. It turns out a very great many of those original passed on stories and knowledge survived into the Bibles, but in our perception of how we read those things, the idea was lost. And
that was my thought as well, mate. Because I've read the Bible, I've read the Quran, I haven't read the Jewish one, but I did wonder whether or not, I mean, you could even go into fairy tales. You could go into the old children's stories. We could go into old limericks. All of these things. This is text that's telling us something that has been passed down through story. Right? It might not be complete fiction or complete myth. What it's going to be is it's an interpretation of data that we may not understand yet.
Yeah. So it's easy to understand. So all I've got to do is look back at what those words originally meant. So when we look at the Bible, the word David, for example, is if we take it to earliest Hebrew, that's actually, it has a meaning. It's not a name at all. Most of those things, all of them, in fact, they weren't names at all. So David is the phrase beloved uncle. It's not actually a name. Jonathan, which extends right out to Jesus at the end of the day, when you take it out. Jonathan is the word or the phrase, a gift from the Creator. And it goes on, Saul, King Saul. Saul is the description of peacemaker. So when they say King Saul, what they're saying is a peaceful king. Solomon, love Solomon, or Soliman, as it's actually said, Sauliman. Well, in English we say Soliman, but it's the same fella. So Soliman is the descriptive part to Saul, so peace bringer, but Iman is unifier. So it's peace bringer, unifier. So when they talk about the Creator brought David to Jonathan, it's basically, the Creator brought the beloved uncle a gift from God. So our interpretation changed, in the way that many of those descriptives became names that we use today, and but they weren't names at all. So it's a lot of fun to look at any Bible page, and I might recommend Samuel, go there and look at those names. But while you're doing it, Google, the original meaning to those names, and now then read the verse, and it tells a completely different story altogether. And well,
that's interesting, mate. That's very interesting. Marcus, so Marcus, mate. We've been talking for a little while. I know everyone's been at work today. It's getting late everywhere we go. Have you got anything you wanted to ask Colin directly? Is there any topics we haven't covered tonight that you wanted to have a chat to him about?
Well, I did want to go a little bit further into the to the glyphs.
Yes, certainly.
But if we do,
remember to talk into your mic, mate. You keep turning your head away from your microphone.
Yeah, ask at any level. You'll find me full of good answers for you. You mentioned before seeing different interpretations.
Who were the people, according to you, that were shipwrecked?
Okay, well, not according to me, but according to the text in Egypt that you can go and see there that tell the story. So it's not my version; it's written.
And who was this person who they'd come to pick up?
Okay, well, that's all part of it. Okay, so what the Westcar Papyrus is the key for that. That certainly helps to explain it a little. So what happened was Khufu being told of this wonderful magician. So she's being told this in her own parlour by one of her family trying to entertain her. And he starts to tell her about this wonderful magician called Didi, who is the greatest magician in the world, but he's still alive today. And so Khufu said to the one saying that, his name was Djedfor. So he's known as a relative of Khufu, and he became king himself. So he's Djedfor Tamphus Menkaure. The three pyramids, one's the Menkaure pyramid, that guy. So that guy, as a relative of Khufu, in discussion with Khufu, telling her about this great magi, Khufu was turned and said, go get him. bring him to me. Now, what's important about Khufu is Khufu was known as a ruler you cannot say no to. Her father, Snefru, in his time, made a law that you cannot say no to Khufu. After Snefru died, doesn't matter he's dead, it's law. He made that law and he's a pharaoh. You couldn't say no to Khufu. So when she has said to Djedefo, go get him, well, poor Djedefo must have thought, oh my God, because he knew where that was. We're talking the other side of the world to do that. But nonetheless, he did. So as it tells in the Westcar Papyrus, he left Egypt, went to the land of Djed Snefru to find Didi there. So he finds Didi, explains to Didi that he has an invitation if he would come back to Egypt to meet his ruler.
In what year was this?
This is the year 2566 BC. So 4,580, what's that, 7 years ago? Yeah, I think, yeah, that's right. So anyway, he does, and Khufu arrives there in Egypt. But in the Westcar Papyrus, importantly, it tells that when Djedefo was talking to Didi here in this place, he says to Didi, if you come, my ruler promises he will build there a home for your ancestors to be honored. Now, I know Egyptians to be very honest. The Egyptians of this day anyway, are extremely honest. So knowing that Khufu made that promise, that meant to me, they did do that. It's got to be built, Did it still survive, So one of the house that was promised would be built there for Didi.
It'd have to be a pyramid, wouldn't it?
Well, it doesn't have to be. They didn't say a pyramid. They said a house.
Well,
and Giza's full of
mastabars.
Yeah, Giza's full of mastabars. There's over 900 mastabars all around the pyramids. And so anyway, one of the goals of the Bunaguru expedition, when we went to Egypt on expedition in 2019, was to find there any evidence at all. Did they finish that promise? Did they build a house for Didi there in that place, which is Giza? And it turned out they did. We found it, But that's another story. But so where I'm going with it was that you asked me who was at Bambara. So Djedefo once again went to Bambara, got Didi, went to Egypt. Now in the meeting there in Egypt with Khufu, Khufu says the immortal words to Didi, you know the numbers of the chambers of Thoth, don't you? And Didi replied, no, I don't. However, I do know where they are. And they're held in a box of flint. And you'd wonder, what would an Aborigine man know about a box? The concept of a box wouldn't have even existed. But it's all part of the interesting story. Turns out Lion Island, by the way, the geological history of the Sydney Basin, it's all flint. And Lion Island is a big piece of flint, Anyway, so whilst they're in Egypt, Khufu says, take me there. I want to go to this place. I want to copy the numbers of the chambers of Thoth. So the Westcar Papyrus finishes in the way of when they basically go to get on the boat, boom, that's the end of the story. And that was the interesting thing about the Westcar, is it's wondered, did the other half fall off? Did it go missing in antiquity? Was there another half? That's when Khufu now disappears out of history. But what we do know now through the learning down there in Bambara, what it says on the walls.
Was Khufu on that boat?
Yes. So Djedefo
Khufu was on the boat.
Yes. Yep. Khufu was on the boat.
And returned?
Came here. Yeah. So this is her.
Never went back.
She died. It says on the wall. They were caught in a storm and the two ships turned upside down. And 100 of them were killed, including Khufu. So the wall on the text of Bambara starts out from where the Westcar Papyrus finishes and starts all over again, and then quickly turns into a funeral wall. And it tells the story of what happened to Khufu, that there she was killed. So the thing about Khufu is, and it's a fascinating story, is that I mentioned you couldn't say no to Khufu. That was the law. So what happened was when Khufu died here, something terrible happened. It wasn't just that she was dead. She couldn't have her heart weighed. The normal way was that their heart was weighed against a feather to see if they'd told a lie or been impure in any way. Well, Khufu kind of was. Khufu was a hell of a gal. Khufu, now we know more of her. We find that she enjoyed a drink, and she could drink the royal rowers even under the table. The royal rowers are the strongest, the bravest, the most purest in the land, and that's the way it tells them of Bambara on the wall when it talks of them. But she could drink them under the table. She loved to party. She was the great Gatsby of her day, and would keep the palace awake of a night with her singing and dancing all around the palace. But Khufu did something very unusual, and this leads into why she's a bit of a mystery. What happened was she was supposed to marry the next incoming boy in line. So his name was Djed Free, not to be confused with Djed 4, Djed Free, Khufu's brother. She's supposed to marry him. But what happened was you couldn't say no to Khufu, and in that moment she went, no, I'm not marrying him. And they're like, what? You got to marry him. You know, they've been brought up together. We see statues of Khufu as a little girl and Djed Free's little boy going through training to be trained to be the rulers of Egypt. And now Khufu's gone, no, I'm not marrying him. She said, I'm marrying him. And she points to the butcher. And his name was Ankaf. And so she married the fellow that holds the title as the head of the butchers for the palace. And so what they did was this, that's a lot of chaos, you know. To be the husband, you know, for the queen, you had to be from a special line. You had to be the A2MN, firstly, you know. So you had to be from that other place, that land in the south.
The blue blood.
And yeah. And so anyway, she decides, no, she's marrying Unkaf, you know. So they couldn't argue with her. So what they did was they split her name up. Her name, Khufu Meritites Henetsen Medju. What they do with it next is Khufu marries Meritites, half of her name. Henetsen goes on and marries Ankaf. So Ankaf is probably a name you've never heard before, I bet, you know. But who he is, when we look at the mastabars in front of the Great Pyramid, that's where all the tombs are, his is the biggest in Giza. In fact, it's the biggest in all Egypt. It's that big. And this is the butcher. And so it confuses Egyptology today. Why did the butcher get the biggest mastabar in all Egypt? What's going on? Not aware that he'd actually married Khufu under her Henetsen name. And where was I going with that? As I said, yeah, you couldn't say no to Khufu. So that's right. So when Khufu died here, you know, she's done something pretty big there. She's completely changed the ascension to the throne of Egypt, you know. And so she couldn't have her heart weighed. Basically, she's going to hell, and she did, you know. So when she died, poof, she went into that black place. But that fellow that was with her, Djed 4, he wasn't just a master of a boat. So his full name was Djed 4 Tamphus Menkori. As Tamphus, his spiritual name, he was the highest high priest of all high priest of Thoth. Basically, he was Thoth, live amongst us. That's how high he reigned. So nobody is more powerful than the highest of high priests, not even a king. A queen is, but the king isn't. He's only the queen's husband. So that bloke with her, when she died here, Djed 4, he is, again, yeah, the highest ranking official there is, the highest high priest of Thoth. So what he did was he did something very remarkable. This is what it tells on the walls. In a communion with those here, they call them the Haru, a human of Ra, as Aboriginals are. They're born of the sun, you know, the father is Bayami. So in a communion with the Haru, using both their magic. So it tells on the walls of Bambara that they're using both Egyptian magic and Australian Aboriginal magic. And what they did was they basically went to hell and brought Khufu back. They brought back her damn soul that wasn't going to go and live in the stars with the creators, as all rulers did. This one wasn't. She was damned, you know. And so what they did there was, using that magic, they gave her newer life. And from this was born the goddess we know as Shesette. So Shesette, this goddess, who we can look up, what she is she's called the mistress of the sycamore forest. And so her jurisdiction, what she does is she stands in that place where Thoth used to stand. And when your good deeds are being accounted for, they're marked on a stick. So you've seen that familiar image of Thoth with the stick and he's marking things.
Yep.
And now I've mentioned it, you might be familiar perhaps with Shesette. She suddenly appears now, and she's the one doing that. So what they did was they reached into hell, brought Khufu's lost soul out, gave her newer life, and made her into the goddess Shesette. And they buried, or not buried, they opened up a place on Lion Island and built inside there a temple to house her soul. Her body is just near the glyphs on the mainland, Henetson, the house of Henetson. It says so on the wall. But on the walls in Barbara, it tells they did this. They opened up the chambers on the island, and there they built a temple for her car soul to live. And so Khufu turns now into the goddess Shesette,
So we're talking about chambers on the island, mate. Can we get access to this stuff or no? Can we prove that this stuff actually is real?
Yep, you can go there and have a look. On the northwest side of Lion Island is one more set of text, just like we see between the walls of Bambara. It was reported first by the national parks, and one of their staff put I think it was a Facebook post out at the time. It wasn't known to anybody, asking, "What's this? Why is these strange texts on this wall? Does anybody know anything about them?" Well, of course, I went there, when we did back in the day. And so what we found there was in line with what it says in Egypt, talking about this, about that place. There, several hundred years before, they buried one other man. They buried Monet. So that Monet, who went out with the Indians to teach law and agriculture into the world, and then they went to Egypt to build a copy of the House of God. When he died, as they would with an Australian Aboriginal man, they brought his bones home, painted red, and they buried them there on Lion Island. And they're there on the northwest side of Lion Island. So what they did was, several hundred years later, when Khufu died, they opened up his tomb, and that's where they built the temple. So Shesette is, when we talk of her, we say this, that, Shesette of the sycamore forest alongside Osiris. And that's how you say it, because she is. Her car soul is alongside Osiris. So she becomes the Scorpion King's daughter in Egyptology. And the Scorpion King, is a bit of a mystery in himself, but it's thought to be Osiris. Rightly so, it is. It was the medicine that was used to resurrect him in the first place. So as she now becomes a Scorpion King's daughter, and we see her with a scorpion above her head, it's relative to that event, And so they call Shesette as the consort of Osiris, but she's not.
So did so the survivors of the shipwreck, were they ever picked up again, or did they lived here? They lived their life out here?
No, they fixed the two ships and took them home. The great Khufu ship that we see there today, and the other one that's alongside it, that now the Japanese have, and they're doing their very best, free of charge, to restore it. Those two ships are the two ships that were here. It has the name of the ship between the walls of Bambara, and it's the same name as the Khufu ship. Those ships had a unique prow, so you could tell whose ship was whose, and Khufu's was never more unique. So her unique curved and inverted prow is exactly the way it's drawn there, with its correct name there between the walls of Bambara.
And is so any of this story in the West Papyrus?
All in there, yes, yeah, yep. Really? Well, up until they leave, Of course, the West Papyrus cuts off as they're about to leave Egypt. But it's told in Egypt, yeah. It's told on the Isis temple. Not just the Isis temple. They told this story thousands of times. Just nobody realised what it was they were talking about. Who would have guessed that they were talking about Australia, you know? So what I'm telling you now is written in text in many places all throughout Egypt. They went to great effort so that we in our time would not forget, you know. Unfortunately, that they dumbed it down as dumb as they could get it into pictures, you know, and still they overestimated our ability of modern man to perceive ordinary, plain common sense.
Yeah,
so far,
common sense. Common sense is not that common, mate. That's the problem, and we find that quite often, don't we, mate?
Well, that's the veil, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's exactly what they feared, and that's exactly why they were building that solution. So Djedefo, he was one hell of a man, you know. So once again, that's Djedefo, Tamphus, Menkaure. The Menkaure pyramid is one of the three there in Giza. So why we don't know anything of him, it comes to Petrie again, that bloody Petrie. You know, so what he did with Tamphus was this, that when in Petrie's day, they were sponsored by the Vatican greatly. And the Vatican's goal was to find a place deeper in antiquity for their faith, to give it more credibility, you know. And so they believed that they were going to find Moses there in about Giza. And so what they did was Petrie was looking for Moses, you know. So they somehow, I don't know where they got the idea, but they came up with the idea that Tutmos IV was the most likely candidate. Now, Tutmos is spelt very much like Tamphus. Unless you know what you're doing, you wouldn't know the difference. Petrie didn't know what he was doing. Keep in mind, this is 1900, really early in the day of Egyptology. You know, Egyptology wasn't even 100 years old yet. You know, not even 50.
No, that's right. Yeah,
and learning was very little. And what a great example he was of that. So anyway, so what he did was all the things done by Tamphus there in Giza and anywhere else where he built, and he built all over the place. He attested those things to Tutmosis IV in that thing of trying to ram down that, you know, this is going to be Moses, you know. So again, the Egyptology all around kicked up a stink. You know, they were already you know, suspicious of Petrie from the Khufu statue as it was, you know, breaking all the rules. And now here he is, you know, taking Tamphus and attesting him as Tutmosis. So if we went Wikipedia into Giza today, you know, what you're seeing there is stories of, you know, 26th dynasty doing this and doing that and so on, you know, all about Giza. And but they weren't. You know, when you read it correctly and you apply them names to the known sign list, it's Tamphus they were talking about. There was never Tutmosis at all, you know. And Tamphus, you can't argue with him. His pyramid's right there, right in front of you, you know, right behind the Sphinx, you know. The Khufu, the Khafre, and the Menkaure, you know. Djedefo, Menkaure, Tamphus. So that guy, what's really remarkable about him is, you know, he's mentioned there in Giza being there at the build of the pyramids. So that was found in undisturbed mastabas as they were digging them up for the very first time. And in there was found the text to say that Menkaure was there on the day inspecting those works going on. So those texts are one of the tools that were used to date the build of Giza. Just one, carbon dating and many other things, you know, paleoastronomy, all those things are other tools. But one of the tools is that Menkaure Tamphus is mentioned there as actually being there on the day. And so that's how big he is. Now, when we look at it, that's the guy that wrote the text at Bambara. That's Djedefo, Tamphus, Menkaure. So he's with Khufu, and he's the one that saved her soul, did all that magic to make her into Sheshet so she could live eternally on Earth. And so that was him. That was a builder of Giza, was there in Carryong, standing where you can stand today if you go stand there. That's remarkable, isn't it, mate? Yeah.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. Well, Marcus, anything else, mate? Yeah, where did you want to go from there?
Oh, that's really good. There's some great information there.
You asked a little bit, Marcus, about other interpretations of what the glyph says. Can I clear that up for you?
It doesn't matter too much.
It's pretty easy.
All I'm interested in this, I'm just interested in your interpretation.
It's other than that, it's a good explanation. It's quite easy, you know.
Yeah.
Well, boys, listen. This has been a very excellent conversation.
It's been good.
I think look, there's always more to talk about. There's always more places to go, but we might wrap it up there for tonight. And look,
Certainly,
I think this is a conversation that will continue another time. There's more things to do. There's more things to share. There's more exploration to be done. I wish you all the best, Colin, on your trip to go up and be with those tribes. And look, understand that, Unlocking the Code and all the boys behind here and all the, the people behind the podcast are completely behind the work that you do with those tribes, and we support them as well. I think that's very important stuff.
You know what? While I'm standing there, I'll tell them just that. I'll put that into the circle. Yeah, I'll take your words with me.
Thank you.
I will. Yeah,
because it's honest, man. Look, we're seeing, and look, the Southern United Tribes. I know we've spoken off the mics about that, Colin, and hopefully, doing some work with those guys again, and it'd be really cool. And we our love and respect and support, and that those guys have been able to do that, mate. So that's excellent. Awesome. Marcus, have you got anything else, mate?
No, that was really good.
Right, thanks for your time and your interest, Marcus. I really appreciate you taking this time out to listen to
I'm on the East Coast
things.
now. I'm on the West Coast now, but I'll be over on the East Coast just before spring.
Right.
And we'll be doing a bit of filming.
Filming, yeah? You like to film?
Yeah.
No, we'll talk. We'll talk. Yeah, we've got a bit of a project, Colin, that I did want to have a bit of a chat to you about, mate. So we'll join the dots with that off mic. We don't want to give too much away, Marcus. We don't want to give too much away, mate. Look, awesome, guys. Thank you very much. Thanks very much for your time, and we'll talk again soon.
All right. See you then, guys.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Good on you guys. Cheers. Great.